What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in true crime. Of course, it is week 4 of the Lori Vallow Daybell trial, and quite the day today. Very emotional testimony. We will break it all down with our best guests. Of course, this is the trial of the so-called Doomsday Mom, the wildly twisted story of a seemingly loving mother, a self-proclaimed devout member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who clearly veered way off course and became involved in the deaths of as many as 5, possibly 6 people, including her own children. Best guest here to break it down. One face is familiar, one is new. The familiar one, Greg Skordas, was a Democrat candidate for Utah Attorney General. He has practiced law since 1982, even though he doesn't look like it, and began his career at the Salt Lake Legal Defenders Association. The other guest, brand new to the show, who we hope will continue to join us. For more than 25 years, Chris Thomas has worked with clients ranging from Fortune 500 companies to professional sports teams. He's managed more than 300 issues and crises and contributed to several books before writing his own. Chris is best known for his work as the family publicist during Elizabeth Smart's kidnapping and rescue, the trial and sentencing of her abductor, and in helping position Elizabeth as one of the leading child advocates in all of the United States of America. His new book, Unexpected, I love the one-word title, Unexpected, takes you behind the scenes, sharing new details, perspectives, and commentary on the gripping search for Elizabeth Smart, and he weaves in his own coming-of-age experiences in the Church of Latter-day Saints. Quick reminder, follow us on Facebook, Insta, Twitter for showtimes. It is at Podcast STS, at Podcast STS. My personal, some people have asked, is Joel Waldman News. I don't like to listen to shows. I don't like to listen to myself. But the other day I was forced into it, and I gave the wrong personal Twitter. I just said Joel Waldman, but it is Joel Waldman News. You can also find us anywhere you listen to podcasts, and you can support us on Patreon or become a YouTube member. To you, Chris Thomas, is the book out yet, Unexpected? And how come so many years after the fact?
Yeah, so the book launched just a few weeks ago in conjunction with the 20th anniversary of Elizabeth's rescue, and it just didn't feel right. And, initially I knew there was a story from kind of the behind the scenes things that I was a part of, and the media's story, but it just didn't feel right until I really had some time to digest it and find some different perspectives. So some life experience, I think, really enhanced that story.
And I didn't know this, Greg, but you were involved in the Elizabeth Smart case as well. Is that right?
Yeah, I got to meet Chris during that time, and I'd be interested in seeing your book. When Elizabeth was found, I was appointed by both her family at one point, and then the court later on as her what we call guardian ad litem. In other words, I was her attorney through the process, although she clearly didn't do anything wrong or have any issues, but just to kind of work with her and support her and make sure that she was treated fairly by the system. And it was a long process. That was a long time ago. I'm glad to see you again, Chris, by the way.
It's good to see you as well.
And Greg says it's not a topic Salt Lake Cityers love to discuss, but we're on it nevertheless, and we will talk about a lot. Andy School, I love this comment. Hello from Detroit. Hope STS is doing well this evening. Remember to hit the like button so Joel's kids think he's a really cool YouTuber. They could care less that I was in front of a camera doing news for 25 years, but the fact that I'm on YouTube, they do love that. I have to be honest. Let's just jump right into it here. Greg, this is right up your alley, and then we'll get into specifics of this and talk a little more about Elizabeth Smart, talk about Chris's book, and have a dandy old time. But Jenny Wilson writes, how much does the panel think that any defense based on deflection of guilt, that is to Alex or Chad, has been compromised by the Colby Summer phone calls where Lori implies that she knows what happened? We heard some of these calls today between Summer Shiflett and her sister, and it seems like they were fairly incriminating. Greg?
Well, the answer to that is knowing about it is different than participating in it, and the defense has made clear from the beginning, Joel, that that the state would have a very tough time putting Lori in a position where she aided, abetted, or committed these homicides. And I think that's been their defense from day one. Now the state's been chipping away at that and has done a very good job. But it's clear that Alex and Chad were up to their ears in this. And the defense even said, I think in their open remarks, hey, Lori, they used the word alibi several times in their opening statements and said, Lori was in Hawaii and you're going to have reasonable doubt when this trial's over. So the state's been working to establishing more than just sort of casual knowledge of what's going on and sort of trying to paint Lori as much more involved in this than what the defense has tried to say.
And Chris, the thumbnail today has a raccoon in it because we heard about a text message between Lori and Chad where he's talking about burying a quote-unquote raccoon in the pet cemetery, which everyone believes is a euphemism for the children. And today we saw some graphic images. I've read about them because there's no camera in the courtroom, which I want to ask you about too. And we'll get into the details of some of these images, and they are harsh. But I don't know. What do you think that does for the mind of a juror to, on the one hand, you hear about this dead raccoon and then juxtapose it with images of, children's bodies, and they are in, bad shape, not just, typical dead body?
Joel, I had probably the same reaction you did in that I was glad I wasn't in the courtroom today. I can't imagine viewing those images. They sounded absolutely horrific. And from all descriptions, it sounded as though most people had a very visceral reaction. Lori Vallow wouldn't even look up during that period. And it's got to have a pretty significant influence. I mean, visually, when something tells a story that you can't tell verbally, that often sinks in. I'm sure it was very difficult for those who were there.
And Joel, we saw those images, a little bit of a preface of them, and I'm sorry to interrupt here, but during the opening remarks, and they were very troubling. I mean, it would have been hard for a layperson to even identify that what we were talking about were human remains. I mean, there were some things that were, it had been clear that whoever had buried these bodies also wanted to make sure that they were decomposing as much as possible and had been destroyed as much as possible. And it was awful, Joel. It was just awful.
Yeah. And there were some legal maneuverings going on, Greg, which I want to ask you about. A quick shout out to a friend of the show, Papa Bear, who comes to us from Moscow, Idaho, the scene of the horrific quadruple homicides. New Zealand is in the house. Wales is in the house here. I love this comment, so thank you. Girl Mom, as an avid true crime podcast listener and someone who is attending CrimeCon this year, as is Surviving the Survivor, can I say I check this channel every single day for an episode? You're in my top 3. Love STS and best guests. Look forward to meeting you, Girl Mom. Working on getting us a spot at CrimeCon. So there was kind of a meeting of the minds before court today, and Lori Hellis, the good Lori, who's been on the show many times, tweeted out saying, people are asking what this is all about. Could it be a plea? It is a status conference, so it could be to tell the court something, or it could be to schedule Chad's trial. John Pryor and what appeared to be his team, 2 other people in suits, were in the viewing room. They all left at lunch. There also appears to be a problem with a state's witness. The judge is supposed to review something in chambers and make a ruling probably tomorrow. Any guess? Is this just typical, Greg, with lawyers positioning for, I guess, getting ready for the next trial already? Or what do you make of this?
Well, it's something we even talked about a week or two on this show, Joel, when they had the big break in the middle of trial. And Lori was sort of distancing herself, and everyone is like, oh, there's a plea in the making. Somebody's about to enter into some agreement here. And it turns out she just didn't want to watch any more trial. And she asked if she could be excused. You and I talked about that on this show not long ago. So I think every time there's this major disruption in the trial, people are wondering, is something happening? Is something going to break? And I've always felt, and I'm feeling less and less like this, that this trial was never going to get all the way to the jury, but it's getting closer and closer to that point. I felt all along that there would be some break in the trial, or some breakdown maybe in the trial, but it looks like we're going to see it to the end.
And we are in week 4, but Lori Hellis went on the record yesterday and says she thinks that closings could be as soon as this coming Monday, which would be the start of week 5. So it's obviously moving at a much faster pace than the 8 weeks that were basically predicted originally for it. Chris, you're a crisis communications guy. That's your expertise. Bobby writes his comment: Lori always turns on the "what about my suffering" when she gets called out. Major narcissist. For the court of public opinion, probably not the best strategy. It came up in phone calls, and we'll get to those. But what's your take, strictly as a crisis communicator? I know she's not your client, but what would you advise if you could?
No, I mean, absolutely not. I think when you're in that situation, you've got to tell a broader story. If it's all about me, that creates some skepticism. I think oftentimes people are very, very much question that. And so, there's a part too of being authentic. You don't want to be too programmed either, but definitely it's something that you want to be cognizant of what you're saying and how you're saying it, and having a game plan for it. Because in a case like this, everything that's said is going to be scrutinized. Even the body language is going to be scrutinized.
Yeah. Shout out to Marina, who's watching us from the south of Spain. Love when she is here and present, which is often. JMM Barkovich, good evening, STS Nation. Greg, to you, Lori Vallow Daybell's uncle spoke to East Idaho News, and he was emotional outside the courtroom today. He seems like a pretty decent guy. I saw him yesterday on another news outlet. And he said he's overwhelmed with gratitude over how many people, seem to care about Tylee, JJ, Charles, and Tammy. It was sad he had to list off all the people who died. He is Janice Cox's brother. Of course, Janice Cox is Lori's mother. And he said, and this is a quote, "What's hit me more than anything is an overwhelming feeling of gratitude to see how many people are involved in trying to get justice for Tylee and JJ and Tammy and Charles." And he went on, and again, broke down crying. How tough is it? I mean, you have so much experience as a defense attorney. How tough is it, even on the, the peripheral victims, the more exterior family members like this uncle?
It's really tough. And Joel, I spent 8 years as a prosecutor too, so I've been able to work both sides. And it's especially tough when you're dealing with children as victims. I mean, it's hard to imagine anything more troubling than to think of a child being either assaulted or killed in this case, and what they had to suffer when that occurred. And I think that when jurors and even the public in this courtroom are watching these proceedings and they're seeing what had happened to these kids, and even the 2 adults that were killed. I mean, I don't mean to single out the children, but the children are just so much more sympathetic, Joel, and that there had to be some level of suffering. Their last minutes of life had to just be horrible. And people walk out of the court and they think about that and they break down. It's not surprising that people are dealing with that kind of emotion, because it's just, I mean, there's almost nothing worse, if you can think about it, than the death or the harm of a child.
And Greg, this comment is interesting, and right back at you with this one. I would really like to know why Zulema and the 2 Melanies have not been charged with anything yet, conspiracy, etc. Some of the friends in action, and Zulema, of course, is the wife of the brother, Alex Cox, but some of the inaction sort of speaks volumes. Could any of these people face any sort of legal, jeopardy moving forward, or no?
Yeah, I mean, probably not. I think that the prosecutors here have kept their eye on the prize, and the big prize here is, of course, Lori and Chad. Chad's trial will be sometime later. But when we talk about crimes such as this, certainly there are players involved. There are people who aided. There are people who were involved in this. Sometimes the government may choose to treat someone more as a cooperative witness, or someone who may have given some information on the side and saved that for later. Maybe if Lori's convicted, in a week or two, she turns on some of these people, and then the state's job will be a whole lot easier if they choose to bring charges against anyone else. But right now, Lori is squarely in their sights. She's 100% under their radar focus here, and Chad's next. And this, if the state gets those two, they've got their big tickets, and the other players they can deal with later.
Baby Doll says, SCS Nation with the heart emoji. What's up, Baby Doll? A friend of the show. Hi from freezing cold Michigan. You got to move to Miami. That's why I did it. Couldn't take the cold anymore. And Atlanta, Georgia in the house. Madeline Bullitt. So thanks to one and all. Chris, you alluded to this a few moments ago. And you are an expert at kind of controlling situations that are high profile. So Summer Shiflett took the stand, and we'll get to the testimony in a few minutes. She was at court with her husband, her uncle we just mentioned, other family members. When Lori walked in, Summer smiled at her, which you wouldn't expect because of the type of testimony that was given today. How closely are the jurors watching all of this from your perspective? Because lawyers across the board say they're watching absolutely everything.
And I've been involved with a number of cases, and Greg and I might have a different opinion here. I'm always thinking about the message, and I'm not looking at it from a legal perspective, but how, in essence, court is a big theater, right? And how is it being perceived, and how, what does that say? Because I believe from my experience that jurors are absolutely focused in on that, and that definitely influences things.
And this comment, Chris, for you from Amy Hart, love to get STS Nation wrapped up into the show. She writes, I heard the call between Summer and Lori. I'm the mother of 3 children and a grandmother of 1 grandson. I would have sounded as devastated as Summer sounded. My heart just broke and cried uncontrollably. So, again, the only people that matter are the jurors, but certainly in the court of public opinion, I think things took a turn today. If that's possible, an even harsher kind of turn towards the perspective of Lori Vallow. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I think Summer, when in that conversation, she's very critical. Not all family members are that direct. And I think we've seen that, though, throughout the case in a number of calls. But in that one in particular, it really it had that strong effect and very conclusive in what she was saying toward Lori.
Greg, a couple of legal questions. Number one, this question came up in the Alec Murdaugh trial. I forget which FBI. There was an FBI agent who took the stand today, and the exact same question was asked by Dick Harpootlian, the lead counsel in the Alec Murdaugh trial. And he asked the FBI agent, what is so special about a special agent? Why do lawyers ask this question, Greg?
Because they want to bolster that person's credibility with the jury. They want to say, you're not just a police officer, you're not just an agent with the FBI, you're a special agent. And so that gets the jury's attention. That gets them to sit up. I love it when prosecutors and even defense attorneys will put their experts on the stand and go through their education and where they studied and where they got their degrees and all the books they've written and that kind of thing, because then the jury thinks, this person knows what they're talking about. This is a person I need to listen to. They're not just here because they're getting paid something. They know their stuff. And to the extent that you can do that with a witness, by all means do it. Bring out their credibility, bring out their best, bring out whatever it is about them that you find and that the jury's going to find to be compelling and make them more believable.
In the case of Dick Harpootlian in the Alec Murdaugh trial, he was actually kind of dressing down a female FBI agent, and that basically mocking the fact that she's special, and that didn't go over very well.
No, that would not go over well.
Yes, and Leanne here with a comment. I didn't see this, but I guess it happened. If Leanne says it happened, why would Summer hug Jim Archibald, the defense attorney, after she was on the stand? I thought it was odd. What's the deal with that, Greg? Why would a defense attorney who's dealing with a state's witness hug one another?
It kind of goes back to the whole smiling thing. There must be something going on there between Summer and Lori. Maybe she's playing them. Who knows what she's doing? That's inappropriate. I'm surprised the judge would allow it. I'm surprised the defense attorney. I mean, you can't necessarily push somebody away, but I mean, and maybe she's just saying, "I feel sorry for you, dude. You're going down with the ship here, and best of luck." But that's something you don't expect. And as an attorney from either side, and I've sat on both sides of the courtroom, you don't want witnesses coming up and doing something like that. I mean, they're supposed to be sort of sterile and in a vacuum and just testifying to what they know and not have this friendship. But there's one other thing, Joel, and I'll talk a little bit. This is small town Idaho. She may know that attorney. He may have helped her with something, maybe did her will or did her Uncle Bob's divorce or something. I mean, they may be friends. He may be in her neighborhood. So there may be something else going on there when you deal with a small jurisdiction. I know it's in Boise, but really the witnesses and the facts and the evidence are all from this smaller rural area, Rexburg, Idaho.
And a final legal question for the moment, and then we'll pivot back to Chris for a couple questions. But there's a question right now, and that is, will there be a defense? Again, as I said, Lori Hellis thinks that this could be over as soon as 3-4 days from now, potentially. Do you believe that there is any defense that the lawyers, Jim Archibald and company, can bring into play here?
Just the defense that they've always indicated, Joel, and that is the state's not going to be able to put on their game. They're not going to be able to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. I mean, that was the last words of the defense attorney in their opening remarks. He said, "You will find, or you will believe that there is reasonable doubt." So the defense is the state ain't got it. In other words, they don't, and under American law, the defense doesn't need to put on anything. Now you would expect them to do something other than just say, "Hey, they didn't carry the day." But my guess is that may be exactly what the defense is. And maybe Lori won't testify, and the defense will get up at the end and say, "Hey, you've heard 4 weeks of testimony. So what? Tell us how that proves beyond a reasonable doubt that Lori killed these kids and killed this woman and conspired to do that." I mean, show us the proof. And I think the defense is that the state isn't going to meet its burden. I really think that's the defense.
Yeah. It's interesting what you said earlier, because I thought the same. I thought there was no way we're getting to the finish line. There's just too much wackiness here, but it looks like we're, the train has not derailed yet. Teresa's watching from Ireland, and everyone knows I stop when I see Jersey. Hello, everyone. Betty Majors, Jersey girl living in Alabama. It's my Jersey hat. Proud Jerseyan here. So Chris, it's going to come the Chris Thomas show for a couple of minutes, Greg. Elizabeth Smart, for those who were living under a rock or perhaps too young, she gained national attention at age 14 when she was abducted from her home in Salt Lake City by a guy named Brian David Mitchell and his wife, Wanda Barzee. They held her captive for 9 months until she was rescued by police. Chris, how did you become involved in all of this?
It was kind of happenstance. Elizabeth's cousin started an internship with my firm a couple of weeks before Elizabeth was abducted, and following the kidnapping, we volunteered to help and kind of fell into something that I thought would be a couple of days, and 9.5 months later, here it was. It was kind of the surreal experience that I never anticipated.
And I mean, I assume she wrote the foreword to your book. You're in touch today. How is she doing? I saw her very recently on a high-profile network show, which I can't remember which one. But how is she doing? And I think she has 3 children now. She's like 35, 36. How is life for her?
She's doing really well. She's like a younger sister to me. We talk quite a bit, and it's the challenges of being a young mom, and also really carrying forth this mission of advocacy. She is so passionate about it and recognizes the opportunity she has to really make a difference. And sometimes that's a lot of pressure. It's like having a superpower where you kind of have to balance some of your personal and family things with this need to serve. But she's remarkable, and it's always inspiring to be around her.
And how the book Unexpected, as I said, Elizabeth Smart wrote the foreword. How is the book? It's only been out a few weeks, but how's the reception been to the book?
It's been really, really good. And the book too, just it gets into the Smart case. And it's it's a memoir both about growing up in the Latter-day Saint culture, but also how that culture came to the aid of Elizabeth. And as in this case, we had a situation with Brian David Mitchell and his religious extremism that, you could argue played a role or didn't play a role in this. That was a major topic. And so it was something that I really wanted to look at. It wasn't the main character, but it was definitely an important part of that story and wanting to provide some perspective.
And I assume that Brian David Mitchell is living behind bars somewhere along with Wanda Barzee. Is that correct?
So Brian was sentenced to life in prison, and he's serving that. Wanda was released a few years back on a technicality. In fact, it was very last minute, and Elizabeth had just a few days notice before she was released, and she lives somewhere here in Salt Lake. Is pretty quiet from what I understand.
Okay. So this comment from Ann Vroom kind of ties into what I wanted to get into with you next, and have Greg Wayne as well. But Ann Vroom, a friend of the show, Lori's sister, agonized, in my opinion, underscored that it is quite misguided to draw opinions about LDS faith tradition from the Vallow Daybell tragedy. Summer is LDS, and she was clearly appalled by all of this. People, when we are doing these shows, people who are members of the LDS church say that this is about, power, sex, money, which is what the state had said. They get very upset, that there is any link really to the church itself. And I'd love for you to offer your take on that, particularly because you are a member of the LDS church.
Yeah, it's something you can't ignore, like it or not. For me, it's almost akin to, I'm a big sports fan, and a player for one of my favorite teams does something really stupid and maybe is kicked off the team or arrested. And it throws shade on the team, but you can't ignore that the team's a part of that. And so there's some disappointment related to it. But if you're looking at it objectively, it's definitely part of it. It seems so as it relates to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that really the only time you hear much about the faith is when there's an extremist who does something crazy in the name of religion. And here's yet another example. And so I think members of the church really struggle with that being the frame of reference. Instead of talking about it, I mean, you can't ignore the facts in this case. It is a key part of it, despite the fact that, yeah, she really polluted and manipulated. And when I say she, I would Chad, maybe. I'm not sure how naive she was in this, but regardless, what they did was a real disservice to the real beliefs of the religion.
And someone had written to me, and I did change my intro after they wrote, because I said that she was, and I'm just pulling up the intro. It originally said that she was a devout member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And this person wrote to me and said, can you please change your intro to a self-proclaimed devout member? Which I did, because she really beyond bastardized the religion. I mean, it's a totally different thing. She went down this crazy rabbit hole. Do you consider her a one-time LDS member, a current LDS member? How do you look at her?
It's interesting you bring up that question, devout, because what we know about her, and I haven't maybe studied it as closely as you have, but I followed it pretty closely. She at one point was devout. When did she go off the rails? Was it when she first started kind of getting in these groups that ultimately led to Chad Daybell? Was it before that? At one point, it's hard to question that. But when you hear and see, where she went with things from a religious perspective, I mean, it's offensive. And, it definitely, I'm not the one who determines, who's a member and who's not a member, but it's something that, she has defiled, the very core of some of the beliefs that we have.
Greg, do you care to weigh in? I'm not going to ask you your religious affiliation, but you're in Salt Lake City, and you're definitely around, if you're not, a lot of members of the Church of Latter-day Saints. But what about this whole intersection between the religion and this trial, and people being upset that it's associated with the religion, but they are linked in an odd sort of way.
Yeah, and I've lived here for all of my 65 years, Joel. And people are cautious here in Utah, and I assume Idaho's the same way, about tying this too closely to the Latter-day Saint faith, and to say that these bizarre beliefs that Chad and Lori had were in any way connected to the LDS teachings, because they're not. And we've seen things all over the country where these sects or these people get off on different tangents that are sort of begin with some association with an organized religion, but then just go astray. And so I think people in Utah and Idaho are sensitive to the fact that the nation is looking at this going, wow, these Latter-day Saints have some strange beliefs. But Lori and Chad were not under any circumstance doing anything that was consistent with the Latter-day Saint teaching or church or leadership, or their beliefs are even so far out of whack that they're not even close to anything that any Christian religion teaches. This whole black and white souls and zombies and people need to be destroyed. That takes religion to a place that it was never intended to go and shouldn't go.
And Greg, maybe underscoring something you said there as well. And I think the reason that there's such apprehension is, are people really watching closely enough? Are they following it closely enough to realize what's real and what's not real? And so, as a Latter-day Saint, the fear is that they're going to believe some of these things or associate those things with the religion.
Yeah.
Sheila writes, hello from Mississippi. This came up yesterday, Greg. Not a lot coming from the defense table. Is it possible they're hoping for a mistrial due to the Speedy trial not being as speedy? This whole Speedy trial issue came up as a reason for a possible, move in the appellate courts to reverse a decision. Do you have any concern about that?
No, and I don't think the state should have any concern about it either. So speedy trial, and I was looking at that question from Sheila, doesn't necessarily mean that once the trial started, it takes a long time. The speedy trial is the time it takes from when you're charged, when you get to the trial, when you get to the trial. And yes, it took a long time. But if you recall, Joel, Lori's attorneys challenged her competency to go to trial, and she was in fact declared incompetent so that you couldn't have tried her. So in fact, she did get what I think a court will determine to be a speedy trial. And ironically, when Chad was making his play for, hey, I need more time, there's this new DNA evidence, my attorneys need to prepare better. Lori's attorneys are saying, no, we want our speedy trial. Let's go. We've got this trial coming up in April, and we want it to go. So they got what they asked for. They got what, in my opinion, and I think in what the appellate courts in Idaho are ultimately going to agree, was a speedy trial. And a 4-week trial, it has nothing to do with speedy trial. It's the time it takes to get to trial, especially for a person who's incarcerated, because they're prejudiced by sitting in jail. And so the speedy trial rules kick in. But the machinations that happened here were no more anybody's fault than one party to another. So, she's got her day in court and she's got a trial, and I don't see speedy trial being an issue in this case at all.
The best guess, breaking it down. The only way our best guess can do it, which is Ann Vroom, calling Chad a toad is an insult to toads. Just saying, in my opinion. I thought that was kind of funny. And this is an insightful comment from Bobby Henson. Lori could have given JJ to Kay, but she wouldn't because she was mad that Kay got Charles' money. She killed JJ to stick it to Kay. Sick. Chris, any thoughts on this comment at all? And then I've got another one for you.
A lot of speculation there. And I think it's when you're speculating on something that's pretty harsh. And at the same time, from everything we've seen in this case so far, it's not implausible.
By the way, thank you, Sarah. Having a better day, Joel? I was having a good day. Something you should know about me: I don't tolerate Mondays. Sunday nights and Mondays are not my favorite 2 moments in the week. Although, since I've had kids, Sunday night is sort of just the moment before freedom arrives. But I think I've told you guys, I got a book deal. I am writing a book about my mother and life advice from my Holocaust survivor mother. And as Chris knows, writing a book is all-consuming. and it drains the crap out of me. So I work on the weekends, I work at night, and it's probably why I looked the way I did yesterday. But I'm back. I'm back. So Chris, to you, another issue that has come up in regards to the LDS Church that I'd love for you to weigh in on is that Judge Boyce, who I guess it's still unclear, but I guess a former member of the church, as he is described, he's taken a lot of flack for not allowing cameras in the courtroom. There seems, according to a lot of courtroom watchers, lack of the transparency that maybe there should be in a public court. And some say it's because there is this apprehension or fear among the members of the church that they don't want things to be revealed, that they could be secretive. Your thoughts on all of that?
I mean, as it relates to the church, I disagree with that. I hope that's not true, because I think that's very close-minded. In the same vein, I would guess a couple of things here. One, just his lack of experience might be part of it, and trying to taper the spectacle that it is. I'm not saying that that's right, but I think that would be more of a motive to keep things close to the vest versus. I just don't know what they would put out there. If there were cameras in the courtroom that would reflect, significantly in a significant poor way against, the religion. I really struggle with that argument.
Summer's jailhouse call was heartbreaking, and let's get into some of the specifics of this now, and we'll have our best guests break it down. 11:02 a.m. local time. Summer Shiflett is called to the witness stand in the Ada County Courthouse. She is the youngest sister of Lori Vallow. And again, Chris, Lori looks at Summer, according to the reporters in the courthouse, and smiles as her sister takes the stand. Judge Boyce notes that Summer is here representing Ty Lee, so she's allowed to observe other witness testimony. She was in the courtroom yesterday and today, and right away is wiping away tears. What is that picture like for those jurors before a word is even uttered?
Obviously a lot of emotion there. It's always interesting in a court of law. Like, so how are you supposed to act in that situation? I don't know that there's necessarily a standard or a guidebook on how to act. And in the same vein, it's scrutinized. And so, how does that play out? What do you read into that? The jurors are definitely watching that. That's something that they're watching very closely. And I believe has an impact on their perceptions and ultimately could have an impact on their decision.
And then Greg, the state is questioning her, and she says about the children on the witness stand. I don't remember the exact wording, but she, meaning Lori, basically told me she knew where the kids were and they were safe. Summer said at that point she believed Lori and thought the kids were okay. Obviously, it took a drastic turn, and that right there shows you, the incredible dishonesty, sort of in a cold, calculating way, from Lori Vallow. Does this start to change the narrative in a sense? Does this start, because one of the big issues, and I don't need to tell you, is really connecting Lori to the murders with direct evidence. This isn't direct evidence, but what does it do in going toward connecting her to the crime?
Well, it gives her knowledge, and in kind of a weird way, kind of a almost like an ironic way, because what's she telling people? And this isn't the first phone call we've heard where she says the same thing, where she says they're fine, and what she's really saying is they're in a better place, and when it all comes down, when the dust settles, we'll be able to talk about it, that they're fine. So what that gives the jury the knowledge of is that she knows they're dead. She knows what's going on. She knows what happened to them. But she's still delusional enough to think that what happened to them was for the better, for their betterment. That sort of shows how completely whack she was, but it's not going to be a defense. And like we've talked about before on the show, Idaho doesn't recognize insanity as a defense. So Lori can be as cold and callous and just sort of like this whole notion that these kids are now in a better place because they're dead might sound completely crazy, but it plays into the state's hand to the extent, Joel, that it shows that Lori knew exactly what condition they were in at that time.
Susan Silver with a comment. I really think Lori thought she would go on collecting the kids' Social Security indefinitely if the kids weren't found. Followed here, Chris, I'd love to get your reaction to this. Stephanie Ella says, sometimes we forget about the other victims, such as the aunts, the uncles, the cousins, the grandparents, and even the friends of the poor souls. I mean, you have firsthand experience with this, dealing in the Elizabeth Smart case. What they're different, but the same in some odd ways. But what was that like for the family day to day while she was missing? I mean, many people presumed she was dead. What kind of effect and long lasting effect does it have on the family members?
What's interesting about it is it's so incredibly difficult, but once you add the public eye into it, it exacerbates that situation. In addition to working with the Smarts, I've worked with dozens of families in crises surrounding murders, kidnappings, other kidnappings, and rapes, some terrible, heinous crimes. And those crimes in and of themselves can really change and define a person. And then the public exposure to it, again, just adds another level. But in many cases, will change somebody's life. It's interesting to see people are resilient and will rise to the occasion often. And in the same vein, even those who are resilient and are able to move on from it find themselves changed. And so it does take a toll. And, behind the scenes, when it's something that's this public, the family members who are trying to process the situation and trying to figure out how to deal with it and deal with the internal elements of it, then have to think about, well, as we're walking out of the courtroom, do we do an interview? Do we not do an interview? How is this being perceived? What are people saying about us and our family? It's really a challenging situation that I wouldn't wish on anybody.
And Joel, if I could jump in just for a minute, to their credit, the family of Elizabeth Smart never gave up. I mean, you're thinking of little beautiful 14-year-old girl abducted, you assume the worst. And unfortunately, I've been practicing too long and I've seen the worst too much. But her parents continued to look for her. They continued to do everything they could. They continued to believe. And I mean, it was a miracle that she was found, but I haven't seen that level of perseverance on behalf of family members for a missing child to just continue to say, we're going to find her, we're going to find her, we're going to find her. And they did. I mean, she was found. It was like nothing I've ever seen before.
And Chris, were there people who believed, because I feel like I remember this, that some of the family members could have been involved in her disappearance, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Early on, about the first week, a story broke in the Salt Lake Tribune about it potentially being an inside job. In fact, Maggie Haberman, the New York Times reporter who wrote the first book on the Smart case, likened it to the John Benet Ramsey case, said it basically created a firestorm that threatened to rival the case. So initially, yeah, there was a lot of focus on the family. The Smarts, as Greg alluded to, were very resilient through this, had tremendous help internally. They had a great family structure. From church, from the neighborhood, they had a lot of people that rallied around them, which I think helped in that case. And they were incredibly inspirational and courageous in how they approached the situation, both publicly and privately. And just seeing the amount of energy and seeing how difficult that is, I really have sympathy for the family members, in this case.
And just a quick footnote, Summer Shiflett does live in Arizona. I believe we mentioned, someone did, that she lives in Idaho, but she is from Arizona. Right Guru, no idea how to pronounce the name, but a cool name nonetheless. Greg, I think Summer's conflicted on her feelings for Lori, having been one of her bigger supporters before the kids were found. And then coupled with this comment, does Jim Archibald, the defense attorney, sincerely believe in Lori Vallow Daybell's innocence? I wonder. Greg, take us inside the mind of a criminal defense attorney, in this case, Jim Archibald. He doesn't sound very reassuring in any of his short little interviews that he has done. But I mean, what do you do as a defense attorney when you're sort of hung up yourself about whether your client is innocent or guilty? I mean, your job is to defend them, right?
Yeah, and maybe people won't understand this and they may criticize me, but there's a difference between being innocent and being found not guilty. And I know that sounds like we're trivializing the law, but if a jury comes out of this trial and they think, you know what, Lori, we're pretty sure you did this, but the state just didn't prove its case, so we have to find you not guilty because they didn't prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, then the defense has done its job. Then they've been effective. And they may have their own beliefs about what she did and what she didn't do and her level of culpability. But their job is to defend her and make 100% sure that the state does its job, that it proves its case beyond a reasonable doubt. And they have to challenge evidence to hope to try to prevent that from occurring. They have to make sure that they cross-examine witnesses effectively, and they have to do what they can. What has bothered me about the defense team, and I'll be honest about this, is some comments they've made outside of the courtroom, especially after the first day, when they said, and I've never heard a defense attorney say this in the middle of a trial, hey, we tried to resolve this. We tried to come to a deal. We tried to get this case resolved, but the state was holding too firm. And what the message is we were trying to plead our client guilty, but they wouldn't take life in prison off the table or something like that. And I thought that was unfortunate. Maybe it will play into something they're doing later on, but I didn't like that.
Yeah, they come across as very tepid, and a guy like Chris Thomas would probably tell him to act a little tougher because it's all in how you portray yourself, the image, the optics, and the optics have been poor thus far.
There's also this notion, Joel, that they've still got to go practice law back in their city, and they're sort of going, hey, we're just doing our job here. We're public defenders. We represent a lot of people, and the one lawyer said, my office has been bombed. Like, please don't do it again. I'm going to be back in Rexburg here in a couple of weeks and trying to practice law. So I'm doing my job. That's a terrible message. And I'm not saying that was their message, but there were some people that felt that's what they were doing.
Yeah, and that was the same attorney, Jim Archibald, who said that he hopes no one's watching the trial, that he hopes people in Rexburg have better things to do when this has captivated their community. So not the best message. Candy Temple writes, Greg, right back at you. What message does it send to the jury if the defense does in fact call no witnesses? How does the jury read into that?
I think the only reason is the defense would do that, well, maybe two reasons. Maybe they don't have any witnesses, but more importantly, I think what they'll do, my guess is they won't call any witnesses. I think Lori will be a horrible witness. I think she'll be, I mean, if I was a prosecutor and Lori was on the stand, it would be like dying and going to heaven, because she will be terrible. She will be awful.
Explain why. So, I mean, I guess the reasons are obvious, but just elucidate why it would be so bad.
Because she can't contain herself. She can't. She has no remorse. I mean, it's like the movie when the guy says, you're damn right I did it. Ordered the murder of the two Marines. I've forgotten everybody's name, but they're just waiting to break her down. And for me, when I was a prosecutor, and I would live for moments like putting Lori on cross-examination, because she's going to say something, and she is cold. She is ice cold. And she's not going to get up on the stand and cry her eyes out, because she's had all this opportunity to do it during the trial, and the jury's been watching her. And I think the state's going to get up, or the defense is going to get up at the end of their trial and say, so what? We're not going to call any witnesses because we don't have to. They haven't proven their case. The reason we didn't call any witnesses is because the state didn't meet its burden, and we don't have to call witnesses. And that's what the Constitution of the United States provides for the defense. They don't have to prove anything. The burden of proof is on the state. That burden is a high burden, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. If the state doesn't reach it, the defense has no obligation legally or morally or ethically to call witnesses.
Tennessee Girl 79. And Chris, I know you're not an attorney, but the question is, after those calls, do you think the jury has room for reasonable doubt even? I've heard everything I would need to convict straight from the horse's mouth. Do you think it was game over after the phone call was released today?
From the court of public opinion, and I'd like Greg to weigh in on this from a legal standpoint, it really felt that way. I think a lot of us had that same sentiment as we watched the calls and are familiar with the calls as is, but realizing how they played out in court.
Greg, is there any?
Is
there wiggle room for reasonable doubt right now?
I mean, the state's not finished yet. I think, you got 18 jurors. You've probably got 14 that are ready to convict. And who knows? I mean, the state's still putting on its case, but I think that the jurors want something more. They want the smoking gun. They want the fingerprints on the knife, and they're never going to get that. But the state's putting together this case piece by piece and building this big wall around Lori that I don't know she's going to be able to overcome.
Jennifer Castaldi, who is originally from New Jersey. Does the esteemed panel think the defense is going to drop a bomb? From what I can tell from you, Greg, you don't think so?
No, I don't think there are any bombs. I just don't think there are. I guess if there is a bomb, it's Lori, and she's going to get up and sell herself, and the jury's going to fall in love with her and find her not guilty. But unless they've got some good theatrics teachers over there in Boise, they're going to have a hard time giving this woman any sort of compassion. I think the defense is, hey, you ain't got it, state. You just didn't prove it. Our client is not the mother of the century. She's not a good person, but she did not commit these homicides.
I'm still trying to get to the call, and I kind of want to break it down and get your guys' take, which we'll do in a moment. But Kat Friedman has a comment here. It's the months later comment from Lori that gets me. Lori's response when Summer mentioned how Lori was taking wedding photos in Hawaii while her kids were dead shows she's competent. Thoughts? Greg, I don't know how much of the call you heard, but anything to add to this?
Yeah, she is competent. She did know what was going on, and she even made excuses for it and said, they're fine. You're all gonna learn the truth someday. And Lori's buying Chad's used car. She's drinking the Kool-Aid, whatever you want to say. She is clearly bought into whatever's going on that's caused this to occur. She's sold on it, and that's a problem for the defense, because she's collecting money from the state, the government, for dead children, tens of thousands of dollars after they die. We know that, and she knows they're dead. There's no question in her mind that they're dead at that point. And so the whole sex, money, and power in the opening statement has been spelled out pretty well, at least on the money part.
Teresa writes, does the state have evidence of the sex? The opening statements are always power. Will the state prove the sex, Greg?
Well, I think a lot of people had testified that Lori and Chad couldn't keep their hands off each other, that they were like two kids in a candy store. And they're both, they're on the beach, they're holding hands, they're at these places, they can't get enough of each other. The sex isn't even important. I don't know why the state threw that in, except that it was a third word to use in their adjectives to describe the murder. But there was some chemistry between these two, Lori and Chad, and there were some fireworks that went on there. And we've talked about this before on the show. This was a perfect storm between two people who got together, and whether Lori used him sexually or he used her sexually, they got into each other's head and they both sort of created this monster, this thing that they were doing, and it was all part of their whole psyche with money, sex, and power. That's what it was about.
Not to mention the dynamic, without getting gross here, but realistic, between Alex and Lori, and some believe that
Oh
that
yeah.
was,
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Brother and sister, right?
yeah, twisted incestuous relationship. Don't know if there was any sexual element, but it was beyond the pale. Sarah writes, Surviving the Survivor, please have some ex-Mormon guests on to explain Mormonism. I have a current one on right now. Sarah, what's going on? You got a current, not an ex, and he's talking about it. Kay Bizzle, it's the same with us Catholics. Nobody ever hears anything good from the media about the church, but they sure do hear about every bit of dirty laundry. Probably don't need to tell you guys. Probably the most targeted religion in America is mine, Judaism.
Right.
People
Right.
tend not to like us too much. So at least behind closed doors. So every religion comes with I don't know, that element attached to it. And it's if you're a religious person, I think you prove yourself by the type of person you are, and how you follow the church's guidelines. So finally, at 55 minutes in, let's get to some of this call and break it down between Lori and Summer Shiflett. From the call, the first part of it, how are you? Lori asks. Summer responds, not good. She is sobbing. I don't know what to say. I'm willing to listen if you want to talk to me, Summer says. Lori says she doesn't know what anybody knows and doesn't know anything. Lori says she hasn't talked to anybody and says, I know they found Tylee buried in a pet cemetery and JJ buried in Chad's backyard, and we don't understand how that happened, Summer says, sobbing. She can barely breathe. You didn't tell us. We are devastated. Chris, what do you make of that exchange? I mean, it's difficult to listen to, and it gets worse from here, just if anybody is very sensitive to this. But what do you make of that first part of the phone call here?
It reflects a lot of what Greg said, just how cold Lori is, and no remorse, but not even an explanation in this case. It's pretty remarkable that somebody would respond that way.
Jessica K says, did I hear Chris Thomas correctly that Chad was officially excommunicated from the church? Do we know if that happened? No.
I don't know. No.
You don't know. Okay. And I don't know either. So if anyone does, please let us know. The next part of the call, Greg, Summer asked Lori if she knew they were there. Lori says, I can't talk about it. Summer says she doesn't know what to say. And the kids, this is difficult. The kids were thrown away like garbage. It's just too painful. Lori quietly responds. Lori says, do you think I let that happen? And Summer says, yes, I do. You went off to Hawaii and were dancing on the beach as the kids were on the ground. You had to know they were there. I don't understand. They were just little kids. I don't understand. How damning.
Very damning. And that sort of echoes Lori's own son in that recorded jail call, where he's confronting her. He calls her a murderer, calls her murderous. And she's just responding. I mean, even if she's not, I mean, it's her children. JJ and Tylee, her own kids. I mean, as a mother, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to call you guys out if you have kids or not, but I mean, imagine getting the news that your kid's body's been found in your backyard or something. I mean, as a mother, you'd be on the floor, you'd be dying. And she's talking about it like, hey, how's things going? And the truth will come out someday, and we're going to be fine. And I mean, that is at least a nail in a coffin for Lori, because you just, there's no compassion for her. There's no love for her. There's no mommy. There's no heart, soul in that woman. And that spelled out, that was a compelling thing for the state to play, that tape, and the other one with her son.
Yeah. So about a minute later, the call continues, Chris. And Summer says, Lori, if you let this happen to them and put them in the ground like a piece of trash, I don't know you. We would have taken them. Summer is now screaming at Lori. You cut me and Mom off for 4 months. now we find out this, and you expect me to just keep going with zero explanation, and you expect me to just keep believing without ever having a question. So clearly the tone here, you're a crisis manager, and we're going from a conversation to screaming. That's got to perk up the ears of the jurors at this point, correct?
Absolutely. And this wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't as though she prepared for this call, but her key messages are sticking, right? Like garbage, dancing on, dancing. Those things are so memorable. And then you add the emotion into that, and it's got to have an impact. Like Greg says, it's at least a nail in the coffin.
And that's a great point, because a lot of times things are rehearsed to present to the media. This was essentially a private call that is now being played in a very public place. 11:14 a.m., a couple minutes later, Lori says, everyone sees what's on TV. Summer responds, this has nothing to do with what's on TV. She screams at Lori about how she defended her on TV and asks for Lori to tell the truth. Lori says, I would love to. Greg, this just shows sort of her cunning and conniving. Like what you said, you can't put her on the stand because she can't contain herself, right?
Yeah, because her truth is not good. What the truth is that these, in her mind, when she says that, these kids needed to die. They needed to do that. That's how you save their souls. And so don't believe everything you see on TV. Someday you'll learn the truth. And I think that's the message. I know it's not articulated that clearly, but the message that Lori is giving to these people in these calls is, you don't know the truth. And somehow Lori's truth and Chad's truth overrides everything else. All common sense overrides the law, if you will, the rights and the lives of these children, because she's still believing at that moment that these, at least I think this is the state's message, that these children needed to die. And there's no turning back. Like that, she did him a favor almost. I mean, it's awful, Joel.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, as the father of 3 young kids, it's painful to read this, and some of the images that were shown, which luckily I could only read, were even more difficult, I believe. But at 11:15, Chris, the screaming on the call continues. Summer screams at Lori that she never called to tell her Alex died, or that her brother died, or that her kids are gone. And Summer says, you don't think that will cause pain throughout our entire family? Lori says, you don't think I'm in pain? Again, kind of the poor me. Summer responds, no, I don't. You were dancing on the beach. And again, Chris is a storyteller and does crisis management. So this imagery of Lori, you were dancing on the beach, having a great time. You got wedding pictures while your kids are in the ground. Lori says, nobody knows. And Summer says, nobody knows except you and the Lord. There is nothing in the scriptures that is godly about hurting a child. They deserve a proper burial with family that loves them at the very least. People are in the courtroom now are crying out loud, visibly crying in the courtroom as this call is being played. Lori is looking down. I mean, I don't think, Chris, tell me if I'm wrong, can optics get much worse than this?
No, not at all. And Summer has just been an incredible witness from that standpoint. I mean, she's told the story so well, brought the emotion into it, but really demonstrated just how cold and callous Lori was in that situation. I can't imagine what that feeling must have been like in the court today.
And Chris, obviously cameras are not allowed in. There's only viewing rooms, and Greg has been there. But I'm reading, I'm reading and I'm listening, but that's all I have. How would this trial be different from a, high profile standpoint, a publicity standpoint, if these cameras were in the courtroom for this trial? Do you think it'd be, it's very high profile as is, but you think it's something that would be seeing on all the news channels nightly, and it would be getting even more attention if there were cameras?
I mean, this moment today, that moment, you could see that leading several cable shows, and that being, the discussion. Not having that, I think, really it makes it harder to tell the story. It makes it harder to put a lot of time into it. I mean, I've been following the coverage, and it's light compared with other cases where there are cameras in the courtroom and they can play those moments, and you can spend an entire half an hour talking about that one piece and get a lot of people watching it, getting a lot of viewers and clicks from something like that.
Yeah. The other kangaroo writes, Lori is a human twister, leaving other human wreckage in her wake. That's a good analogy, I think, or a metaphor. And then Sarah writes, Lori definitely has a severe personality disorder. I think that kind of goes without saying. The call continues, Greg, 11:20. And Summer says, there is nothing okay about this. Nothing. Lori responds, nothing about this is okay. Summer. And Summer says, I am telling you because I love you with all my heart. Please consider that Chad has lied and been deceived, and you have been deceived, and this is not what you think it is. There is nothing okay about killing children, nothing. And even if you didn't kill them, and Alex didn't kill them, and Chad didn't kill them, you threw them away like garbage in a pet cemetery, and Summer's now sobbing, and she can barely breathe. The interesting thing about this is, at this point, she doesn't really know who's responsible, but she says, please consider that Chad has lied and been deceived. Does this set up the state sort of for the next? Does this kind of tee up some stuff for the next trial where Chad will be tried?
I don't know. I think it was more played, Joel, because that Summer's trying to give Lori an out. Chad's a monster. You just admit it. Just tell us that none of this should have happened, and Chad's just lied to you, hoping that Lori will break down and say, you're right, he's bad, he did this and that. But Lori holds her ground. So, I mean, it helps on the trial with Chad, but I think it's more damaging to Lori because Summer's giving her an out. Just tell us this is all Chad's fault. It's kind of the message I'm hearing when I heard that. Tell us that Chad lied to you, and we'll start forgiving. Lori's she's not having any of that. She's not taking the bait, and it's dooming her. It's dooming her with this jury.
Yeah. Thank you to Amy Hart, who just became a YouTube member. I appreciate that. A comment from Kathleen Smith. When Summer mentioned that Lori was dancing on a beach in Hawaii, Lori said that happened much later. Lori knew those kids were dead. Final bit of this call, 11:20 a.m. And Summer says they were innocent and they were loved, meaning the kids, of course. Come up with an explanation publicly. The call cuts off. I'm not sure what she meant by that. Come up with an explanation publicly. Chris, do you have any take on that? Was she trying to help her sister at that point?
It's such a strange comment. It's difficult to say, and maybe it goes back to this whole element of, hey, I'm giving you an out. Blame this on Greg. Go for it. And in essence, maybe this is her parting shot of, if you're not going to blame it on Greg, you better figure something out, because what you have now is not going to play.
And then, Greg, to you. So then Jim Archibald questions Summer, and he asks to have her describe Ty Lee, and she describes her as beautiful and witty and very talented in a lot of different ways. Jim Archibald also asked Summer if she was concerned about the new religious beliefs, and she responds, of course, I care about my sister, but I don't really know what to think about it. What is the defense strategy in asking about Ty Lee, who says is a beautiful kid, which plays right into the fact that is an even more heinous murder, and then about these twisted religious beliefs of hers, which she was concerned about? What's he getting at by asking that? It seems like it's playing into the state's hand, not his.
I've done criminal work for 42 years, prosecuting and defense, and I listened to the defense cross-examination, and I hate to play armchair quarterback, but you asked the question, so I will. It's almost like these questions are more out of a curiosity instead of trying to elicit some testimony that they think is going somewhere. It's like, well, tell us about Tylee, and talk to us about this, and almost like they're interviewing her for the first time on the street, and because the answers were awful for the defense. They didn't help the defense. They didn't play into the whole reasonable doubt thing. I don't even know where they're going. And I've seen some of these cross-examinations where you would expect that the witness would answer what we call, cross-examination questions. They're leading questions. They're questions that elicit either a yes or no response instead of a narrative. And that's really dangerous for a defense attorney to ask questions that allow for a narrative, especially one like that, an opinion about a crime victim. I don't understand it, Joel. And again, I'm not there. I'm not sitting next to Lori. I sometimes wish I was, because it's the kind of case you think you could do better. But I'm not going to say that.
I will. Sounds like they're doing a terrible job, and continues here because at 11:30 in the morning, I mean, Greg brings up a great point. It sounds like Jim Archibald is almost asking out of curiosity, like, hey, I want to know about this, not realizing he's defending a client on the stand. And I think rule 101 of attorneying is never ask a question you don't know the answer to.
Exactly. Right.
In the courtroom. So at 11:30, he says, Archibald says, would you ever imagine her sister wanting to kill her kids, your sister, meaning Lori? And she says, no. Would you ever imagine your sister wanting to conspire to kill her kids? No. Again, like, what is the point of that? If my sister, God forbid, killed someone and asked me, do you think your sister would ever kill someone? Of course I would say no, because you don't expect, but it doesn't add any value, right, Greg? I mean, it's just talking.
No, because she didn't imagine it. That's why she's so incredulous when she's talking to Lori in the first place, because she can't imagine what she's hearing. She can't imagine what her sister's telling her, and she can't imagine what's happened to these poor little kids. And so Summer's like, she's beside herself, and the defense attorney gets up and says, gee, weren't you beside yourself? Could you imagine your sister doing this? No, I can't. And I think the jury's going, but she did, but she did it. And now what do you think, Summer? But of course you can't ask that question, but I don't think it set up I think it was intended to say, do you think your sister is capable of doing this? Is this something that you can't really say, do you think your sister did this? But I think that's what they were trying to get close to that without stepping over the line. And I don't know that it reached its effect.
And by the way, Rose Shiflett chiming in. Hello, SCS Nation. My last name is Shiflett, but no kin to Summer's hubby. Just saying. So there we go. Clarifying the record. KCL, who has been following this very closely and again is in Salt Lake, says, no, Jim Archibald does not believe Lori is innocent. I say that because in court hearings, he has said there will be a time to discuss Lori's mental health in the mitigation phase. That was before they took the death penalty off. And this comment, circling back to Chris, I still remember when Elizabeth Smart was found. What a refreshing break from so many similar cases that ended in tragedy. I'm still amazed, actually. She's a very smart and classy young lady. So there was one more bit of testimony that we'll kind of barrel through here and then let our guests go and eat dinner. And that is FBI Special Agent. What that means exactly is anyone's guess. FBI Special Agent Steve Daniels. And this is very graphic. And during this part of the testimony, Lori is allegedly taking copious notes. She's not looking up. She's just literally writing. And he gets on the stand. He was at the scene when they unearthed the bodies. And for those who are sensitive, please put earmuffs on or I guess check out another YouTube channel or mute us because it gets a little graphic here. But at the beginning, he says that sifters had to be brought in at the site of the children's death to catch any possible pieces of evidence, and then goes on to say, like potential bones, jewelry, or anything else that could be significant. And he starts to deliver his testimony. And Special Agent Daniel says that bone fragments, organic material, and miscellaneous pieces of cloth and fabric were collected from the fire pit. The next image that the people saw, the jurors in the courtroom and everyone else, shows the fire pit as it's getting cleaned up. Daniel says the smell was overpowering and a soil sample was taken from the fire pit for testing later. So, I mean, Chris, this is sort of setting up this really macabre, dark, just almost horror-like scene at Chad Daybell's home. And sometimes these images, there's a reason they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So a little bit later, the special agent says, we now see an image of a piece of bone found in the dirt. With the size of the bone being found, I could also smell an odor I could associate with human remains decomposing. So between this bone being found and a second bone being found, the decision was then made not to use the tractor anymore. And they, I guess, started working on with the sifter there. At this point, we didn't know if this was animal or human. We were trying to excavate it and get it out of the ground. And then Greg Skordas, this is the toughest part here. This special agent says the first pieces of Ty Lee were uncovered. At this point, they were unsure what they had found, but it was a bigger bone. And then a photo is shown, and it is described as a mass of human dismembered, melted humanity, and a green bucket with a part of a skull. It took us a while as investigators to figure out what happened here, what this all was. What's your reaction to hearing that?
Unfortunately, Joel, you have to do that as a investigator in a homicide. You have to recover as much of the body as you can. You have to establish that it's in fact the person you're looking for through DNA samples. You have to save what you can for the medical examiner to make an opinion as to the cause of death. And it's horrible. I mean, I've been to murder scenes and I've smelled that smell. You'll never get it out of your brain. You'll never get that away from you. But he had to do that. I mean, he wasn't there to describe the goriness of it. He was there to describe the meticulousness of what he did. And of course, it was gory and it was horrible. But that's what they found. I mean, that's what was there. They didn't make this up. And that's another reason why. And I know we talked about it before, Judge Boyce restricting cameras and sort of same day coverage from the courtroom, because the maybe he's trying to preserve the integrity of this jury and not get the sensationalness of this outside of that little courtroom there in Ada County, Idaho.
And just one last thing here. So there was an FBI forensics analyst named Nick Balance with two L's, like balancing a ball, but with two L's. And he worked on a lot of the forensics and was able to trace a email account named Homer J. Maximus to Alex Cox. And it basically, through that and through the cell phones, show that there was a lot of cell phone activity between Lori, Chad, and Alex right around the time of the murders, that they were all speaking to each other. And it also puts Alex's phone near the murder scene. Does that part of it, that Alex's phone is near the murder scene, in your opinion, Greg, does that raise any sort of reasonable doubt? Because I always thought that the defense was going to be blame the dead guy, Alex Cox. He's not here anymore. He died of natural causes. So does that raise any reasonable doubt that they're actually putting Alex's phone, not Lori's phone, at the scene of the murders?
Well, if you recall, Joel, some of the counts are conspiracy counts. And so to the extent that they can tie Lori and Chad and Alex together through phone records or through whatever they're using to put him there, that also puts Lori there. If she's part of this conspiracy, if she's part of this conversation, if she's part of the knowledge of what's going on, if she helped in it, if she participated in it. So, I mean, I know it's not, on its face, doesn't seem like it's particularly helpful to the prosecution, but it's evidence and they have to put it on. But I think it's helpful in the long run to show Lori's complicity in this, that her working with this as a conspiracy, because that's one of the charges.
Well, we made it through a lot of graphic and powerful testimony. I think that today definitely was a pivotal and a seminal moment in this case. If Lori Hellis is right, we're just days away from closing arguments. But the man who I hope does not close us out and comes back is Chris Thomas. For 25 years, he's worked with Fortune 500 companies, including professional sports teams. He's managed more than 300 issues and crises. He's best known for his work as the family publicist during the Elizabeth Smart kidnapping. And he has a new book that you better buy called Unexpected. It takes you behind the scenes of the entire Elizabeth Smart saga, and he weaves in his own coming-of-age experiences in the Latter-day Saint culture. Any final thoughts today, Chris, on all of this, especially with the perspective in relation to Mormonism, your religion?
Just briefly, I think it's interesting. There's been talk in previous podcast episodes about the jury, about the defense not presenting, about using that religious strategy because the jury was all LDS, and then that was kind of debunked in the last thing. But I'm wondering, and maybe Greg, you could provide some insight. It seems to me that it wouldn't be because of the religion, but it seems to me it's because there's just not enough substance there.
Greg?
Yeah, I mean that you hit it right on the head, Chris. You really did.
So the man who just said that Chris hit the nail right on the head is Greg Skordas, a big friend of the show. He's been super gracious with his time. He was a Democrat candidate for Utah Attorney General. He's been practicing law since '82. He was a prosecutor. He's a defense attorney. He's done it all. As you've heard, he's practiced so long that he's seen things that probably wishes he hadn't seen. Are you in this school of thought that this trial is going to end much sooner than later, Greg? And I know you don't want to say this, but has the defense essentially just thrown their arms up in the air? I don't want to say given up, but do they, it seems like the defense is indefensible at this point.
No, I'll defend them a little bit and say that the state doesn't have the smoking gun. The state doesn't have that final. I mean, I think there are some jurors that may hold out. I don't know. I mean, you think with 12 you're gonna get them on board. I don't know that there is much of a defense, and I hate to see the defense sort of throwing in the towel or making excuses for their client and for their own conduct. I've seen a little bit of that, but there may be some method to that. So I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. I'll be there for closing remarks, closing arguments. I'll be there for the jury deliberation, and we'll see what happens. I trust the system, Joel. I've done 200 jury trials. I trust the system. I think jurors almost always get it right.
And I would tend to agree with you. I think people are busting my chops because I think I may have said Greg instead of Chad. So doing multiple things here, guys. I'm reading comments. I'm working on the show. So sometimes there's a slip up. So if that was me, I apologize. Relax yourselves. But thank you for watching. Quick programming note. Tomorrow, we're actually doing a 12:30 p.m., a lunch live. 12 noon. I put out show times at Podcast STS. We have Dr. Daryl Appleton, who has never been on the show before, and Harvard lawyer Lee coming on tomorrow to discuss this case. And then at 5 p.m. Eastern time on Thursday, we have Florida State Attorney Dave Arenberg that's going to weigh in on all this. He's been on all the cable news channels. He's a Harvard guy, Harvard undergrad, Harvard Law School, very smart fella. He's been following this. He's the state attorney, could be the governor of Florida one day. He's going to come on with Tara Malik, a criminal defense attorney out of Boise, to discuss this. So again, tomorrow, 12 noon, Thursday, 5 p.m. Eastern, and then your True Crime Phil with Scott Duffy and Phil Waters, 12:30 p.m. Eastern time on Friday. I know it's confusing. That is why you have got to follow me on Twitter at Podcast STS. Papa Bear, hit the like button to help support Joel's hard work and his great channel, and always fabulous guest. That is true indeed. Until next time, love you, America. Love you, Salt Lake City. Guys, hang on one sec.